Well, I'm supposed to talk about acting out during psychotherapy for incest-derived clinical problems. I'll elaborate in some detail some experiences in group psychotherapy, and I'll briefly examine also some experiences in individual psychotherapy, including a very summarized comment of the psychoanalysis of a male incest victim. In the group of female incest victims that I treated for 2 years and a half, there was a woman who was a brother-sister incest victim by the name of Betty. She had suffered from early childhood from agoraphobia and complained with shame and pride, but more shame than pride, of suffering, if that's the word, multiple orgasms that made her somehow ashamed of losing control and becoming, as she said, like a sexual beast. Betty's family had been extremely poor. She had studied social work and learned about group psychotherapy techniques. She led the group that she was a member of into despising both the female and the male co-therapists as if we were old-fashioned, cruel, ignorant, and mean. She organized an attempt to move the whole group to another clinical agency in Topeka, and she led them in this flight movement with plans to move all of them together. And at the peak of a very paranoid atmosphere that developed in that group, she and her actions followed in, at least in the planning by the other members, were enacting out both of the devaluation of the group as bad and poor, and a search for a better one. A feeling that was an acting out of the wish that Betty in particular, but many of the other group members have experienced, of despising their families of origin and wanting to find another better family that would receive them as members. As I said, Betty's family had been extremely poor. The neighboring house was a whorehouse. As a girl, she befriended many of the prostitutes that worked there. Her older brother, that was her incestuous lover, organized a striptease function with Betty as the star when she was about 6 or 8 years old. And they charged a quarter to the participants who attended the striptease show. And they used to have with her brother sex at night in a crowded bedroom where there were several siblings, because their family was formed by two former persons who had widowed and married and have two bunch of offsprings. And they used to have sex with the brother covering her mouth so that she would not make noises. And in the middle of that, she suffered from multiple orgasms, making her very ashamed and struggling to respond. This is a vignette about acting out in group. Briefly, a vignette about acting out in individual psychotherapy. An incest victim female who had been abused by the husband of her oldest sister was interested in having analysis. She was herself a clinical psychologist, but after struggling to stay in analysis 5 times, during which she always lied on the couch with one foot on the ground, her head turned and looking at me, like ready to jump and leave, which I had commented repeatedly. She finally, without jumping, left, telling me that she couldn't stand it anymore, that it was unbearable for her. She had diagnosed that I was a typical male chauvinist. I had, in her mind, the following accusatory components in my office. A wooden statuette from Thailand that was an stylized body of a female. I had a painting of the Delphic Civils, this Delphic Civil of the Sixtine Chapel by Michelangelo, that was in some way relatively naked in her, the upper part of her breast and her shoulder. All of those pointed out to her that I was a sex-crazy male, that I was ready to jump on her, and while she was lying down, like in bed, in a room with me alone, which for her was intolerable, so she quit. And she sent me a check for the 5 sessions, and there came the acting out. She wrote the correct zip code of my office, 30033, but instead of writing the name of the state, Georgia, she wrote down Maryland, which was the state where the older sister lived and where the abuse had taken place, unaware entirely of the Freudian sleep and its obvious meaning that I couldn't then convey to her because she was no longer coming to see me. But that's another example of acting out. So in other words, we can say that acting out is an attempt on the part of patients to master some traumatic past events without words and without memories, repeating instead through actions some of their traumatic experiences. It is as if they were unable to either remember or put into words, and instead, unconsciously, they resort to acting one way or the other. Of course, in group psychotherapy, we have the dimension that the other group members are dragged along to become accomplices of the acting out, like I told you in this attempt to change agency led by Betty and her group. The action that is acted out is an attempt to communicate the unspeakable feelings through actions that happen on the one hand, usually and mainly outside the context of therapy, therefore out, and mainly and lastly out of awareness of the unconscious meaning. A male incest victim that I treated, who was a dentist, and I will talk about him later on, used to come to the sessions walking into the office with a $100 bill like this, without being aware that this was in her, and in his unconscious, like an erect penis. He had been the victim of an exhibitionistic mother who used to get drunk and visit him in his bedroom and perform some grotesque striptease show, and asking of him to be with his genitals exposed and watching the size of his penis and whether he had an erection or not, and commenting on it and making mocking comments about it. He paraded the $1 bill. A piece of acting out that we could examine later on. In some way, actions can be used in the psychodynamic of the mind hypermanically, as in search of fun. Having, for instance, sexy, exciting parties, combined perhaps with drugs, This same man, the one with the paraded the bill, used to organize striptease parties in his apartment. Usually he foot the bill, paying for all the girls that he hired, and invited a group of friends, and they had something like a mixture of a striptease party, a drinking party, some drugs, and some kind of group sex or something of that sort. But for him, looking and being looked was the essential part of his fixation to the trauma of mothers performing striptease. Sometimes the actions not only are hypomanically defensive, but they can be also some kind of paranoid quasi-delusion construction of someone as an enemy that had to be fought and had to be eliminated, like the bad group that was conceived by Betty as an intolerable, and she organized looking for another group. Working through, or elaboration, Durcharbeit in German, is the same as working through in English, or elaboración in Spanish, is the underlying, I meant to say, is the solution or the counteraction, the remedy of the acting out. The attempt is to examine and understand the underlying unconscious feelings that are being expressed through actions, and teaching the patients to become aware how they resort to actions to avoid those feelings and create curiosity in them to understand such unconscious feelings is the task that we describe as working through, and that we teach our patients to counteract their tendency to act out. The patients need to learn to develop how to read and explore the many meanings of their feelings and conscious. We have to help them translate the actions in their own words, not in our words. It's like learning a new language in some way, and we have to help them to develop a new vocabulary that will describe their feelings. Often these patients suffer from what was described by Sivnius as alexithymia. This is a complicated Greek word that if we study their etymology, its etymology means without the ability to read your feelings. Without lexis, reading, thymos, mood, feelings. So in some way they are analphabetos. They don't know how to read their feelings or how to put them into words, and that's the task of the working through that we have to help them develop. As I describe in the paper in Acting Out, we treated with Dr. Boniviukili initially 7 women. We added then 2 more. We hired them, or we found them, by inquiring among the individual psychotherapies of the outpatient department at the Menninger Foundation whether they had in individual psychotherapy incest victims. And we had there a pool of potential patients that we interviewed and we selected, mainly with the excluding criteria of not bringing into the group any one patient who thought might have been abused but didn't have clear evidence of having been abused. So we selected only those who had clear evidence of having been abused. They fluctuated between 18 and 45 years old, included father-daughter, brother-sister, brother-in-law, sister-in-law victims. Among the pool of patients, there was one that we could have selected and invited to participate who was a male. but he turned down the participation. It was a very interesting case. Briefly, he was a very attractive, beautiful young man, the son of a nurse. He suffered from epileptic major seizures, and he had been abused by mother. In the following circumstances, his father was a sadistic, brutal, punitive individual who used to give him terrible blows and abuse him physically. Often, this abuse, physical abuse by father, was precipitated an epileptic major seizure. And in one of these opportunities, mother stood in between the father and the son, trying to protect the son, and the son went into a seizure after the convulsions and after having lost consciousness. Of course, as any epileptic after a major seizure, he woke up confused, and mother in the meantime had been comforting him, caressing him, embracing him, kissing him, and one thing led to the other in the middle of the confused state of the mind of the patient, and the mother mixing tenderness with physical stimulation, and they ended up having sex. The young man turned down the offer without knowing that he would be the only male. That was a problem that we had in mind, but not because of that, but he didn't want to let potentially anyone know about what his mother had offered him as a special favor and as a unique experience, that he didn't want in any way to be misinterpreted as something that he criticized or resented or wanted to make public as a way of accusing her. It's an interesting perspective of how some male victims abused by mother may respond to incest as opposed to the sense of being outrageously violated that female often have. There were three areas of acting out in the group: sexual fantasies, power and sadism, and self-destructiveness. The sexual fantasies were ever present. Women dressed in a kind of provocative / coquettish / exhibitionistic way. Many of them coming with very short shorts and exhibiting considerable parts of their skins visible, and act in coquettish ways in their nonverbal behavior. And the sexual fantasies were ever present. I am, as you see me, rather overweight, and sometimes I have heavy breathing because of my tummy. and some of the women in the group responded to what they criticized as my heavy breathing, as if I were a horny male that was after them. And the memories of the heavy breathing of their abusers when making moves to sexualize their relationship with them. Betty, the same one who organized the big acting out, the girl who was the stripteaser, once organized in her inexhaustible capacity to lead the group attendance to a male striptease in Topeka with the collusion of her husband. Betty and her husband had tried, among other things, ménage à trois. Her husband suggested that perhaps Betty could bring into their bed her best female friend, and they could try sex among the three and see how it went. He was also very interested in what he called the incest girls, and he organized the visit to these male striptease and had even the mean idea of asking one of the performers to come to the table where Betty was, grab her, and simulate some attempt to rape her in public. All of which was reported by the group after having attended. First, they planned this move in secret, keeping us excluded, like the children playing sexual games away from the scrutiny of the parents, you know, and getting kicks out of excluding us. And on the other hand, Betty ended up having one of her anxiety attacks when this performer simulated an attempt to rape her, and she then remembered how she could have intense anxiety attacks and her agoraphobia that had disturbed her considerably. So she also remembered how unbearable it was for her to see her husband and her best girlfriend enjoying each other in their sexual intercourse, with her feeling excluded from those intense moments of pleasure that they were sharing, leaving her out. Acting out of sexual fantasies, and in some way perhaps having striptease functions with us, and in some way sexualizing the relationship with us, at the very least in terms of being the jealous excluded ones that didn't participate in this quote fun. Power and sadism was another area of acting out in the group. Indeed, victims learn to use power stealthily within their family, being secretly the favorite. Mainly daughter-father incest are like the favorite in the harem, often replacing a disabled mother. The two father-daughter victims we had in our group had their respective mothers disabled. One of them, mother had a severe accident with an agricultural machine in the countryside of Kansas, and became disabled physically. The other one, her mother was a foreigner that father met as a GI when being in a military American station abroad, and brought her to the US, and mother developed chronic paranoid schizophrenia, so she was mentally disabled, and her daughter replaced her as the companion of father, not only in bed, but also in administering finances, the discipline of the younger children, etc. So often also they exercise power mainly by controlling the secret of incest, with the sense that they have this trump card of power destructiveness, that is to spill the beans and let everybody know about the dark secret. And all of this gave often incest victims a blackmailing leverage over the abuser. On the other hand, the power in the family is such that often the abuser behaves like a child that asks and demands and expects to be taken care of by the child. The child becomes like a parent of the abuser, is, in the terminology of Galinas, parentified. The child becomes like the parent of the abuser, or there's a confusion about who takes care of whom. All of these things build up the experience of incest victims on using or abusing power in a sadistic way. There is in all of them some unconscious identification with the sadism of the abuser. Edith Jacobson, an analyst from Vienna, was a prisoner in a Nazi concentration camp. And while being there, she experienced severe acute anxious episodes of depersonalization, during which she felt she was no longer herself, that she had lost her identity. And she published a study of depersonalization called On Depersonalization, whereby she communicates her own self-reflections and self-analytic understanding, as well as the understanding of other prisoners, how this feeling of depersonalization, of not being yourself anymore, was an expression of the perception that she, Jacobson, had identified herself with the jailer's sadism and was having enjoyable sadistic fantasies and sadistic behaviors that were like a mimic of the way the jailers behaved. So she felt that she had lost herself, and that was one of the roots of the depersonalization. Karen, one of the other father-daughter victims, was a master of intimidation. She arrived often late, left the sessions in the middle of the sessions abruptly, kept usually silent through the sessions, avoided eye contact, usually sat by my side and made a pronounced statement by giving me her back, and so on. And she, in some way, paraded a role of the silent, unreachable, unreachable, derisive individual who despised everyone. She was using silence as a way of expressing her enormous rage. Once it happened that there was a role reversal. During a session, she had some angry interaction with Anne, another member, and while they were leaving the facilities and going to the parking lot, Karen wanted to talk with Anne and call her, but didn't do so with enough volume of voice so that Anne didn't hear her, and just went ahead and went into her car and got into her car and left. And for Karen, that was like her being exposed to the arrogant despise of a silent, intimidating person, like a role reversal. Anne was doing to Karen what Karen did to us in the group. And she brought this up in the next session, trying to confront Anne with her alleged arrogant, silent, despising attitude. And then it became clear that Anne had not heard her, and it became clear for Karen that she herself maybe usually behaved like Anne was perceived by her to behave. But the thought was, and her aggressive use of silence became so intense that the co-therapists, we discussed what to do with it. And we had agreed that Bonnie, the female therapist, would confront gently, not me, but the female therapist, Karen, with her attitude being intimidating to the others. And an opportunity in which Karen abruptly, angrily stood up and was about to leave, while she was opening the door and still with her hand on the door knob, Bonnie told her very gently, "Do you realize, Karen, how you try to intimidate us all in this group? How you succeed in making us all feel very tense and threatened by you?" Karen remained for a while in the room, inclined her head and left, and then came the following session, sharing a lot of insights about how she identified herself with the intimidating behavior of father. Self-destructiveness is another area of acting out in a group. It is like a self-inflicted punishment to expiate the guilt or the shame for the having broken a taboo or for being that aggressive that they have stolen a forbidden man from their legal partner, so to say. Wilma used to get drunk and ride a bike in the middle of dark roads of the countryside of Kansas when she felt guilty. But she increased this behavior when she found herself falling in love with a 10 years younger than her young man. She was 25, he was 15, and he was the son of her best friend, a very attractive, muscular, athletic man that she fell in love. But if you hear the undertone of all this thing, there she was, an adult, 10 years older, getting excited sexually and falling in love, quote unquote, with a young man that was underage somehow, and a forbidden one, the son of a friend. She felt so guilty as to keep this secret. She only dared to tell us and share it with a group as one of the reasons for her self-destructive behavior when she turned 25 and he turned 15. She believed that by then her relationship with him would not be a felony legally, but a misdemeanor. And therefore he did not fear telling us and us reporting about it, because no longer that was a felony. But that was the intensity of her guilt and her legal fear of being punished, and said, I don't want to live anymore if I'm going to be going on doing what my father did, because I am like him, after a young person, stealing his life for my use. The working through of these areas of acting out is important. Working through the sexual conflicts is focused mainly in the last resort in helping the patients overcome their hate of their own bodies that they claim are uncontrollable, like Betty's multiple orgasms that make her not only enjoy them but suffer, or like all of them felt that they had been aroused, had lubricated, had getting in sexual hit, and had even had orgasms, quote, with the wrong man, unquote, a forbidden man. So all of this needs to be elaborated and worked through. The same would be regarding the working through of power and sadism, and I already told you the story of Karen by the door, the intimidating person. The working through of self-destructiveness is important. Wilma, after sharing with us her love for the 10 years younger man than her, and comparing herself with father, indeed was using the group, and the group responded in kind, to ask for forgiveness, to ask for permission, to allow herself to enjoy the relationship with the young man, to overcome her self-doubts about a woman, about being a woman, about her womanhood, to have some sexual pleasure in life, all of which was understood and underwritten by the group, in some way giving her permission and forgiveness for being in some ways like her father, as she said. As a footnote, there is almost a Hollywood happy ending. Wilma married this man. Later on, I was not there in Topeka anymore, but Bonnie attended the wedding of Wilma with this younger man. So it was a Hollywood happy ending. Briefly, some comments about acting out during individual psychoanalysis of the man with the bill in erection. As I said, he was a dentist, 40 years old, divorced, of a Polish-American background. His personality diagnosis was a schizoid personality, and he suffered from voyeurism. He had been married and he divorced who had been his high school sweetheart, and then lived a life in which sex was mainly attending striptease joints or hiring striptease women to his apartment and having kind of group orgies with his friends, and he's footing the bill for it. As I told you, his preferred sex was voyeurism. And he was aware of his reluctance to get married again, and presented his presenting complaint as his anxiety about entering a commitment with a woman and eventually remarrying. For him, getting into a commitment was like being trapped in a relationship or being dominated by his alcoholic mother. So I had at the beginning the problem of how could he commit himself to come regularly to psychotherapy. He worked and lived in about an hour distance from Atlanta, so not only was his commitment phobia a problem, but also each time he came, he spent 2 hours on the road back and forth plus the hour in the session. So he regularly negotiated the attendance in ways that he often canceled in the last minute or didn't come regularly, and these were about 2 years of this game. And in the sessions, the activity was mainly nonverbal through the eyes. We sat vis-a-vis, facing each other, and during the session what he concentrated was on measuring the aperture of my eyelids. And he considered himself basically as entertaining me, and had grandiose ideas that he was a wonderful entertainer like Woody Allen, and measured the success of his performance by the overture of my. He could. You're dropping her. You're dropping it, or then you're falling asleep on me. So I had to elaborate on him the sadistic use of looking, and the unconscious identification with mother, seeing himself as a performer for me, from the Bill on, and his anxiety about really not getting my attention, but getting instead my rejection. Also, I had to teach him that he became more concerned about the aperture of my eyelids when we was talking blah blah blah, psychobabble, avoiding. As a phobic patient, he was very good in avoiding important issues, and we started talking meaningless things. Probably I did not look so intense in paying attention, but that was connected with his avoidance. So he learned all these things, and he gradually moved into accepting coming 4 times a week and started an analysis that lasted 2 years. I just quote highlights of the acting out during that analysis. He kept attending striptease shows, occasionally looked for exotic women. And he looked for exotic women. He found a Latin American masseuse who he started visiting, and massages led to other kinds of physical contacts, and for him, getting to bed, this Latin woman was like having some sexual contact with a Latin like me, and in some way he invited her to move in with him. She wanted to go to college and complete some education. He started paying for her tuition and books and helping her to get better educated. And then suddenly she told him once that she had gone to bed with a former boyfriend recently. He couldn't tolerate that, so he ended that relationship. But then he went for a period looking for exotic women and mainly looked for Asiatic prostitutes. He found some kind of Japanese or Korean mixture of massage and whorehouse, where he enjoyed what he said was for him the epitome of how he wanted women to treat him, or me to treat him. That the woman had invited him first to have a massage, then to get into a bathtub with very hot water where he relaxed and she sung, and then she dried him, massaged him again, and then they had sex, and this was the perfect thing, and this is the kind of woman he wanted, but also exotic. And again, in the attempt to acting out, breaking the boundaries of the professional relationship, as he was trying to become my friend, he attempted to take out this Asiatic prostitute, which he did not succeed in. Then he moved from the exotic women to the exotic ideology and started looking for centers of Zen Buddhism, where he could get some meditation training. And he started attending meditation training, and you can guess Zen was better than Freud. So that was the end of our relationship. That's the piece of the acting out of this that I just summarized. But in general, let's say that acting out has been conceptualized in the theory of psychotherapy in different ways. And according to the favorite theory that the psychotherapist adopts, we have different approaches to the phenomena of the acting out. For instance, let's say the behavioral mode approach is to try to look for rewards and punishment in the response to the acting out, so that the acting out behavior could become gradually aversive and avoided because of becoming unpleasant or connected with pain and punishment. Or let's say the theory of existential / interpersonal psychotherapy a la Yalom in group psychotherapy would be like, action and acting out may be the opening up of a new style of creative new behavior that may be rehearsed and learned and eventually leading to potential change. So it can be promoted or fostered or tolerated. In the behavioral modality, acting out could be loaded with punishment, forbidden. No acting out, tolerant. Acting out, end of therapy, end of treatment, punishment. And the analytic view is the one I have presented, in which acting out is, as I said, the dream that could not be dreamt. The fantasy that could not be put into words. The actions that in some way make you feel better with yourself, less anxious, less sad, less alone. In group psychotherapy, of course, the presence of the members, of the other group members, is a great help as a mirror, as a resounding board, and as accomplices of helping the process of working through. And of course, the co-therapist relationship can be very useful, as illustrated in the example of Karen, the lady with the doorknob. Essentially, acting out is a style of relating that is very frequent and prevails in incestuous families, where often there is alexithymia, the inability to read moods or feelings or express them in words. Often some of my patients come from families with a bipolar genetic component that is important, manic, depressive, and different degrees of intensity. I welcome your questions about acting out.